Oh, you unfortunate creature! Your mother must have sung an Armenian ballad while you were being born. Even the interpreter of Russian wisdom, Kuzma Prutkov, has good sayings for such a case. The unluckiest among us is the fir cone, because every Makar stumbles over it. I repeat, this unfortunate nature of the planet Earth must continuously and without respite adapt herself to manifest always otherwise, and yet again otherwise, so as to remain within the common cosmic harmony. In order that you may represent to yourself and understand well in what way unfortunate nature there so adapts herself, that there should be obtained what is called the equilibrium of vibrations required from this planet for the common cosmic harmony, I shall explain to you only about one fact which is just now being actualized there, that is to say, subsequent to that process of theirs which they called the World War. It was plainly owing to the fact that during the said process what is called poison gas was invented by beings called Germans, and what are called special rapid-fire machine guns by beings called Englishmen, that the amount of Rascoarnos, or deaths, unforeseen by nature took place on this occasion, and in a far greater quantity than was then required by her. Or, as the candidates for Hasnamus there, namely the commercial businessmen, would say, overproduction occurred in respect of the deaths of the three-brained beings required there. In consequence, nature there had again to begin from that moment to puff and blow, and as is said there, jump out of her skin, in order to correct this unforeseeingness and adapt herself once again in a corresponding manner. This time, from what I myself learned for certain during my last stay there, and also from the intimation communicated to me by etherogram, great nature there is evidently about to increase, for future times, the birth rate of other forms of beings there. I noticed in the cities Petrograd and Tiflis, situated in the large community Russia, of which community more beings perished than of any other during that world war of theirs, that kind of quadruped being, which as a rule never appeared there, namely the quadruped beings which hate people and which are called wolves, were already prowling in the streets. In the information communicated to me by etherogram, it was said, among other things, that in the same large community Russia, the birth rate of beings of the kinds of rodents called mice and rats had increased to such an unprecedented extent that at the present time they are beginning to devour most of the stored provisions of the beings of the said community. It was further conveyed in the same etherogram that the power-possessing beings of the community Russia had applied to the beings of another European community to undertake the destruction of the existence of those small beings, mice and rats, which had multiplied among them, in return for which they promised to pay them as much money as it would cost. Though a temporary reduction of the numbers of these poor rats and mice may be obtained by various means at the disposal of those specialists in the destruction of the existences of others, yet the beings of the other communities will possibly not quite consent to this gratis. To pay in money, however, this the beings of that Russia who promised it will of course not be able to do, since it might cost them in money much more than their last war. And to get money from the same sources from which they drained it during the great process, our dear Mullah Nazar ad-Din says, as to this, nothing doing. Even a donkey can understand that peasant flesh costs nothing in peacetime. Having said this, Beelzebub became silent and began to look expectantly at his grandson, who, as if talking to himself, very sadly, in a tone full of despair, said, How will it all end? Is there really no way out at all? Must these unfortunate souls who were formed on that unfortunate planet really remain eternally unperfected and be endlessly coated into various planetary forms and everlastingly toil and moil on account of the consequences of the properties of that accursed organ Kundabuffer, which, owing to the reasons extraneous to them themselves, was attached to the planetary bodies of the first three centered beings of that ill-fated planet? Where, then, is that pillar upon which, as it were, our whole megalocosmos rests, and which is called justice? No, this cannot be. Something is wrong here, because during the whole time of my existence, not once has a single doubt ever crept into me as to the existence of objective justice. All I have to do is just to clarify and understand why. At any rate, from this present moment, the aim of my existence shall be to understand clearly why the souls arising in these terrestrial three-brained beings are in such an unprecedented, terrifying situation. Having said this, poor Hussein, full of melancholy, dropped his head and became sadly thoughtful. And Beelzebub looked at him with a very strange look. Strange, because in this look his love for Hussein was very clearly seen, and at the same time it could be sensed that he was nevertheless very glad that his grandson was experiencing such a depression. This silence continued a fairly long time. At last Beelzebub heaved a deep sigh, with, as it were, the whole of his essence, and spoke to his grandson in the following words. Yes, my dear Hussein, certainly there is something not quite right here. But if nothing could be done for the beings of that planet by that being who now already has the reason of the sacred Podkulat, and is one of the first assistants of our endlessness in the government of the world, namely the very saintly Ashiata Shiamash, if he could do nothing, what then can we expect, we beings with the reason of almost ordinary beings? You remember the very saintly Ashiata Shiamash, then in his deliberations under the title The Terror of the Situation, said, if it is still possible to save the beings of the earth, then time alone can do it. We can now only repeat the same in regard to this terrible property of theirs, of which we have just been speaking, namely their periodic process of the destruction of each other's existence. We can only say now that if this property of terrestrial beings is to disappear from that unfortunate planet, then it will be with time alone, thanks either to the guidance of a certain being with very high reason, or to certain exceptional cosmic events. Having said this, Beelzebub again began to look at Hussein with that same strange look.